All right, everyone. Welcome to the Brown Perspective. This is your host RO, and I'm here with my co-host Eduardo. ¿Cómo estamos hoy?
Pues bien, aquí aguantando calor en Los Ángeles, California.
Tell me
It's gonna be
about
a
it.
hot one.
Yeah, yesterday was scorching.
I think it's gonna be get to 100 today or close to it. But the nice thing about living in the West Coast is that it's not as humid. It's more of a dry heat. So at least you can escape from it if you are under shade or inside.
I have relatives and friends from the my community growing up, and a lot of them still work outdoors. I
Yeah,
always
that's
I
tough.
always think about them when it's hot like this because I used to do work like that as well. Construction, landscaping when I was young. Anything you have to hustle, right? You have to do whatever is available to you. You do that and just to get some money. And I just remember those hot days were unbearable. Literally, you had to take breaks sometimes. You had to
Hmm.
grab the water grab the water hose and just wet the entire part of your neck and your head just to stay cool.
You're
But
back, yeah.
yeah, but you go out there and you do it over and over again because that's the only, sometimes that's the only thing that you can do.
Yeah, man, it's tough. Like, and I know here in LA, well, really in many parts, but here in LA, because everybody, for the most part, likes to keep their lawns nice and clean. So I know there's a lot of people who are working. That's they have to do that in the weekends. And to your point, it's something that families have to do. I know it's a time where kids join their parents if they're in the industry. But yeah, so shout out to all the hard workers, hustlers. I think if you have seen our I guess our image is of El Paletero in front of the Capitol, and I think in some ways our show is a we pay homage to the hustlers, to the paleteros, to the jardineros y jardineras, and everyone who's hustling out there to provide for their family and for a better future.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning that because I realized we've never really talked about our logo here because that's one aspect of it. The other way that you can see it is it's open defiance as well because he's selling paletas.
It is, and paletas in the heat. And I remember I went to a lake last weekend, and there was a paletera lady with her cart, sounding the beautiful sound of the bell, and all the kids and all the grown-ups were like, "Oh yeah, there's paletas. Let's go get those." And I think it's interesting, and perhaps we can talk about this at another episode. But I know that not too long ago, there's been some instances of people robbing or trying or spewing hate on paleteros or people who sell fruits or flowers in the street. And I think the nice thing about that is that it's really brought the community together to try to support those people and make sure that they know that they're important to us as a community and that we appreciate their hustle and their work.
Yeah, so this represents the ongoing struggle, the
Hmm.
resistance.
That's
And
right.
and by the way, I haven't heard about these latest ones, but I've known for a long time that these guys that are out there selling elotes, paletas, they get robbed all the time.
Mm.
Actually, when I lived back in South Central and they used to pass outside the house, I'd go out and I always talk to them, and that's one of the questions that I would always ask them. ¿Cuántas veces te han asaltado en los últimos 2, 3 años? I just ask them very casually.
And I wonder if that guy was like, oh man, this guy's gonna
No,
me
I
va a
would
saltar ahora.
no, not. I would just ask him because it's just a very honest question that I would ask him. There wasn't any agenda behind it. I was just asking them because I knew that these things happen to them. And yeah, sure enough, like, oh, pues la semana pasada, y lo hace 2, 3 meses me chingaron, and right, like all
Yeah.
the time, these type of abuse, robbery, discrimination, people yelling at them. This stuff happens to them all the time. So I'm glad that it's getting more attention now. If you said where was the incident?
There was actually there was one in Hollywood. It was one by the close to the Hollywood sign, but I think that was more had to do with permission. And I think some of the Karens in the neighborhood asking, "Oh, do you have a permit to
Yeah.
sell here?" But it was funny because then there was a bunch of cholos, and other community members, but it was mostly like the Cholo aspect uh, that they went. And obviously, and by Cholo, I mean folks who look like, there could be potential gang members. They have tattoos and stuff like that. But those folks coming to sort of to the rescue.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways, is kind of um, the stereotypical uh, cholo or tough guy in the family coming to the rescue of those that are more vulnerable. So I think in some ways it's kind of like a beautiful juxtaposition of like this is who we are. Like we're hustlers. We're also out hustling in the streets, but like we're one community. And just because you have tattoos, it doesn't mean that you're a gang member or anything like that. But it's just kind of it's the perception that people have when they see a Latino with tattoos.
And he's the one that came to the defense of the street vendor.
Yeah, so it was there was a group, and I'm trying to remember what there was a video actually that they showed. Maybe you can. I don't see it in the ones that you're showing right
No,
now.
this is the one from a few years ago where the guy topped over the eloteros cart. This
Oh
is
yeah,
still
and the
one of
people
the
came
ones
together.
that is the most well known. But what can I search for? Now you got me interested in this. Hollywood.
Sure. Yeah, Hollywood. I think it was a fruit vendor.
A ver.
And while you look for that, one of the good things here in LA is that the city is moving towards, is that one, Latino community support street vendors.
Yeah. So let me play this one while you. Okay.
The reason why we're hiking today is because there's a street vendor around the corner from the Hollywood sign, and the community of the Hollywood Hills have been harassing her.
You have a license?
Oh wow.
You have a license to do this?
You gonna buy something?
You don't have a license to sell?
What is it to you?
I live here.
Since we've been here since 11 o'clock, there's nothing but white people harassing us.
Yeah. Okay. They've been harassing her, and the guy in the beginning is the guy that started. He's doing the walk in solidarity, right? To.
Yeah, and he brought his homies and other women. And I know there's I think it was a part of a movement. And I think towards the end there's uh, a couple of the leaders talk about why it's important to be there. You see one of the girls talking about it.
Let me see right here. I'll go here.
Well, it's funny because I've done that hike.
Hollywood, not Hollywood. You say?
Jicama.
You don't know what
jicama
You don't know what jicama is, huh?
Mexican check.
This is a lifestyle shoot. Look, you see? Look. Look, you see all the smiles? Look, when you eat a fruit, you smile. Look.
By the way, every time I'm driving around in LA and my wife sees one of those, she makes me turn around.
They're so good, man.
I know.
The fruit is so
I
fresh
know.
and it's so cheap.
We sometimes we go hunting for fruta, man. Because like if we're in a neighborhood that we're not familiar with, so we don't know where they set up, we'll go around looking for one.
Yeah, and chances are you'll find them, and usually at some critical intersections, like
Yeah.
we either right off the freeway, by a freeway entrance, a main thoroughfare.
Well, I'm glad that they're doing this. I didn't know about this one. I'm glad you bring it to my attention. And this gets me thinking about a topic that I've thought about in the past, which is very rarely discussed amongst Latinos in the Latino community. And goes back to growing up in LA in the 90s when it was infested with gangs. It's like everywhere you went, it was gangs everywhere. The pressure to join a gang was huge, starting from junior high and then even in high school. And some neighborhoods had it worse than others. But anywhere in South Central LA, East LA, anywhere you went, at least like the neighborhoods that I grew up in, and then the ones that I used to visit, it was everywhere. And well, we already know all of the negative things about gangbanging. We know that it it terrorizes the local neighborhood. It terrorizes the people as well, the drug dealers, and then how it's just like the gang members themselves are victims of the environment, and sometimes they're both the aggressors, and then they're also the victims in certain cases. And so all of the dynamics of gangbanging, right, that come associated with it. when I was in junior high, when there were when we were getting bullied, and a lot of the times, like growing up in South Central, uh, unfortunately, the Latinos and the African Americans would always end up fighting each other. There were race riots sometimes in the high schools. You would hear about them, and then as a kid growing up in LA, I mean, we got picked on a lot. We got picked on a lot by the black kids, and getting mugged, getting pocket checked. Do people know what pocket check is? Do you know what pocket check
I
is?
don't know. Define, break that down for me.
Pocket check is really, they're just gonna come to you and check your pockets to see what do you have of value, and they'll take it.
Hmm.
Like anyone that grew up in LA in the '90s knows what a pocket check is. And
Damn.
I'm not saying that Latinos didn't do that to black people or that Latinos didn't do that to other Latinos. It's just that in the neighborhood that I grew up in, it was the Mexicans and Latinos are the majority now, but in the early '90s, it was African Americans. So a lot of the hostility towards us was coming from African Americans. And so the only pushback that people like us had, or the only people that would come to our defense sometimes in the junior highs and in the high schools, were the Cholos. The
Yeah.
Cholos provided that counterbalance to the black gangs that would try to take advantage and do and pocket check and beat up and pick on the other kids that hadn't joined gangs. So even though on the one hand the Cholo culture was pressuring you to join gangs, and you lived in that culture, you wanted to resist that, and maybe you face some consequences as a result of it. But on the other hand, you have another group of gangs or another group of people that are picking on you, and then it's the Cholos, not the same Cholos, but other type of Cholos that are the ones that stand up for you. And if you can talk to a lot of Latino kids that grew up in LA in the '90s. If it wasn't for the threat of the gangs being there, knowing that they could come in and back you up at some point, I think the amount of harassment and people getting mugged and things like that would be even higher. And so that's like the double-edged sword of the dynamic
Oh
of
my
growing
goodness.
up in a community that's filled with gangs, that for the most part they're doing things that are very harmful, but at least in some cases, it just it's really unfortunate, but it does seem to work out that those guys were the protectors.
Yeah, it's not unfortunate. I think it's a concrete thing.
Well,
I
I'm saying
know
it's
that.
unfortunate that someone has to grow up
Yeah,
in a community like that where that's the reality.
that's true. That's
So,
true. And it's interesting because so much of gang culture comes from, it's almost like you have to have a gang to protect yourself against another gang. And I know, at least my limited history or my limited understanding of gang history is like, you had the white gangs and, white supremacists and Aryan gangs, and mostly in prison, right? And then you have the black gangs and the Latino gangs. And in some ways, those gangs are formed themselves in order to protect each other, but also out externally, they kind of say they serve that same function, right? In some ways, is so an auto defensas, right?
yeah,
There,
and
there's a way to protect
yeah,
your community, and unfortunately, like you said, unfortunately, sometimes they do bad things. But yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon, I guess, if you can call it that way.
and also I mean, I'm not. I don't like the way that they romanticize cholos these days. Make it seem like they're. I don't know if you've seen the recent characterization of cholos, um, and it's just not accurate to really what the cholo culture was in the early '90s.
Hmm.
And I'm not a big fan of that, because I feel like if you're going to portray them, it should be accurate. Sure, you want to humanize them, but you also need to portray the negative consequences of just the cholo lifestyle. But uh, when I was in elementary school, and see, I was always afraid of confrontation. I wasn't the kid that would rush to a fight. If I could, I would just avoid it. And if you grew up in the hood, that's considered weak. That's
You were a
your
normal kid then. You
yeah,
were like
exactly.
me.
But in the hood, the incentives are all misaligned. You have to project strength and confidence,
Strength.
right? Because otherwise, if
Yep.
people know that they'll call you a punk, that that you back down. But see, I was that kid that I probably wouldn't have resorted. I mean, it would have taken a lot more really to get me to become physical and to, or maybe I would have just ran away. I don't know. But see, I never had to find out because I had a buddy named Shorty who later on in life ended up becoming a cholo. In elementary school, he wasn't a cholo yet, but he was already kind of showing the signs that he was going towards that lifestyle. And it was my friend Shorty that would stand up and fight everyone else.
Mm.
And he ended up in jail by the time he was in high school, and drugs and all of that stuff. But I remember, I always think about that experience, and I say, man, like, in a way, he we sacrificed him. He was
Mm-hmm.
sacrificed so that the rest of us could have like a somewhat normal experience, a normal
Upbringing,
life.
yeah.
Because
Yeah, is no, finish your thought.
y era cabrón para pelear Shorty, man. He was a short
Claro.
kid, but it's like most of the kids were afraid of him because they knew that this kid could fight.
He
And
was a
and
pit bull.
yeah, exactly. And he was like, well, I don't know if I did it intentionally or not, but we were like best friends.
Mm-hmm.
But I never got into any fights. He was the one that would always get into the fights, and that kept my record clean.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to get a quality education, move up in the ranks, go to junior high, high school, college. And my friend Shorty along the way never made it, but in a sense, it was sacrifice of me, and my story, I'm sure, gets repeated over and over in a lot of these neighborhoods. And so, just like I suppose it's me, a shout out to all the shorties out there, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That even though their life could be characterized as maybe they've done a lot of bad things, there's also some some good in a way. It's a weird gray area that you get into because I don't know what would have happened if I wouldn't have had kids like that would have stood up. That means I
Mm-hmm.
would have had to have done that. And the minute that you
Mm-hmm.
start getting into fights, the minute that you start having to physically defend yourself in school, because people are either you let yourself be bullied and you do nothing about it, and maybe you have some internal trauma as a result of that because of bullying all the time, or you decide to stand up for yourself. But the minute that you stand up, all you're doing is you're entering into what could be an endless cycle of
Mm-hmm.
fights, retaliation, more fights, and eventually that starts affecting your school record. That starts affecting your performance because you get suspended. So it's a downward spiral, and I appreciate the fact that I was able to just hover on the entrance of that spiral and never get
Mm-hmm.
sucked in.
Wow, that's deep. No, 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 it's true, man. And I think in some ways, and it's sad, right? Because in some ways, are a lot of people that grew up in the circumstances that you did, and then I did to an extent. I don't think it was to the same level as here in LA, but it's sad because in some respects, as a young kid, you can be a cholo, you can be, you eventually you end up in the army, more likely the Marines, or you do sports, or you the academic, right? Sort of
Hmm.
the stereotypical routes that are available to you. But I think the point that I wanted to get to was that, and I don't know, this might be a male thing. Like we are about, kind of like being in tribe, and I think maybe it's the warrior ethos that is kind of ingrained in male culture of wanting to be around men, feeling powerful when you're in a team. And I think that in some ways the you got to ask yourself why are there gangs? And I think we talked a little bit about some of the aspects. I mean, there's a protection aspect, but also they provide kind of this role models, this environment, this love. And I think it was Tupac, who I know references sort of growing up in that type of environment where you're hustling with your homies, but they show you love.
Hmm.
They always protect you. Obviously, you have a lot of the dynamics that you have in a team or a family, right? You have the people who are jokers, the people who are kind of like the fighters. You got the people who are the hard workers, and it's this important dynamic that I feel they provide like a home for a young man to kind of develop their identity, to get their emotional support, to learn about life, to learn about important life lessons, or in some cases to allow others who don't have to, who for whatever reason, whether it's luck or predisposition, they don't do it. Um, but at least they kind of provide that buffer that allows others to go about their lives and be able to get ahead.
Yeah, and that's a clear example of someone being a product of the environment or something being a product of the environment. And a lot of the gangs that form are because it was a group of people that maybe were moving for the first time into a new environment that was already a poverty stricken environment where gangs had to form for a number of reasons. And that is a perpetuating cycle because these gangs would pick on the newcomers. The newcomers would have to form gangs because that's the only way that they could push back. You push back against a gang by being like them. And a perfect example of this is the Mara Salvatrucha, when the Salvadorians that were fleeing the civil war in Central America started coming to LA. The Mexican gangs already had a stronghold here. They were pretty much everywhere, and a lot of these Central Americans were getting picked on. A lot of them would join the Mexican gangs, but it just came to the point where there was enough of them that, and they still felt like their community was being picked on by the Mexican gangs, and they started forming their own. And what's crazy is that the people that were coming from the Civil War in Central America, they had exposure to a level of violence that was on a different level than the type of violence, the type of rules of engagement that you had between the gangs here in LA, because that Civil War was bloody, and the
Yeah, it
type
was
of thing
brutal.
that these kids were exposed to, the trauma. Well, they come over here, and next thing you know, this gang is it's pretty vicious, and the tactics, the way that they defend themselves, they end up being even tougher than a lot of the gangs that were already here. And that's, to this day, the Mara Salvatrucha has the reputation of being one of the most vicious, violent gangs in the world now. And again, it started because kids that were fleeing violence from their countries in Central America came to neighborhoods that were pretty violent. And what do they? Well, they had to defend themselves somehow. You know, what do you do when the gang members are your neighbors? They live right next door to you. They live everywhere. So that's the natural reaction.
Yeah. No, and I think that, thank you for pointing out that a lot of it was because of the in some respects government sponsored violence that was perpetrated in El Salvador,
Yeah.
supported by the U.S. in many respects. And so yeah, so you can kind of see the creation of this vicious cycle and the unfortunate way that so many youth, like you said, kind of end up going into that spiral, downward spiral of gang life and crime. But then you'll have other folks who are able to escape it, who grew up in those circumstances, like you and I.
Well, why don't we
And
talk
to
about Pitbull?
Pitbull,
Because I
yeah,
know
I
this is
was making my
something.
way to Pitbull, man. You got ahead of me.
Oh, my bad,
Woo-wee.
my bad. I
It's all right.
interrupted your flow there.
It's all right, bro. It happens. That's what life is all about. He talks
It
about imperfection, perfection. But anyways, I think maybe one of the reasons we started into this topic was because I was just listening to a conversation with Pitbull where he talked about a little bit more about his story, how he grew up, and he did grow up in Miami in the 80s, and I guess at that point, Miami was the cocaine capital of the world.
yeah.
All these chaos, and he talks about the hustle that he grew up, but he also grew up with a lot of love from his parents, his mom and his dad who told him to recite Jose Marti poetry. His mom who worked with him took him on jobs, whether it was selling Avon products, cleaning houses, all these things. So anyways, I think he talks a little bit about how he was able to, as he says in his songs, to turn a negative into a positive, and a lot of things that he's doing now extend those opportunities. And he has, I believe, at least one or maybe two charter schools in Miami that are aimed at helping kids just like him have a better shot at getting an education, but an education that's more relevant and that prepares them for a better future.
Should I play this video right here? Is it
Yeah, I
still
haven't seen it. I missed Premios Juventud this Thursday, I think it was.
okay? Let's see what he's saying
I
here.
disappointed my mother.
Bueno, quiero decirle a Hope que ella me cambió la vida. La quiero mucho y me inspiró. Era una persona que creyó en mí cuando nadie creía en mí. Y ella me dijo dos cosas cuando yo era chamaquito. Me dijo, the biggest risk you take in life is not taking one. Y lo otro que me dijo, mira, el día de mañana, cuando tú llegues a otros niveles en la industria de la música, yo no quiero nada de ti. Yo lo único que quiero es que me des las gracias cuando te ganes un premio. So, Hope Martínez, quiero decirte que este premio es para ti. Muchas gracias.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, I mean, you can see him getting choked up just thinking about the influence that this mentor had on his life. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people underestimate how big of a deal it is to have people in your community that believe in you as a kid.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, it can
Yeah.
make a huge difference when you think about it. And the more people like that you have, the better your chances of getting ahead. Even
You-
if you make mistakes or even if you face challenges. But yeah, I know I can think of so many, a handful of teachers, counselors, mentors who really helped me throughout that. Even by just sharing a little piece of information, a little program, a little pep talk, they really changed my life.
Yeah, and this is the one thing that the conservatives always get wrong, because they always want to portray life as this like simple formula that if you just work hard enough, that this country offers you all the opportunities, that it offers more opportunities than any other country in the world, so that there's no excuse for you not succeeding. I mean, they forget two crucial things. You're measuring your station in life relative to those around you. People don't measure their station in life relative to how people are living somewhere in Africa or the favelas in Brazil. They're measuring it based on what's around them, because that's real to them. So that sets your reference point for how you feel about yourself, right? And also the second thing is, there's this, how is it possible that every single neighborhood across the United States has libraries, or at least when I was growing up, I know that there's a lot of defunding that's gone on, and sometimes they have to close on certain days. But assuming that you have a library in your neighborhood that's open at least even 3 days a week, that's a lot better than another country where you don't even have a library, where you don't even have
Yeah,
access
or
to
you-
that. But how is
Or
it possible that you
weren't
have?
even
Sorry,
given the
what?
opportunity to read, right? To
Right,
learn
but
how to read.
but then how is it possible that you have that opportunity, yet the kids don't walk in there? And a lot of people don't understand that the reason why the kids don't walk in there is because they never had anyone that actually believed in them, that made them think that they could achieve something. It's not that hard to understand that if you don't provide a kid with the tools and with the encouragement to go into the library and do these things, he's not, or he or she is not going to do that. Because if you, from a young age, if there's no one that makes you believe or allows you to build these barriers to make you feel self-confident, and to believe that you can achieve a lot in life, the weight of the oppression that you're going to experience, it's going to be overbearing, that it's really hard to overcome. That's why the support network is really important. It's not just about having schools and about having the libraries being physically there. You need the people that will help you fortify your mind. And if you don't have that, and if all you're hearing is that your ancestors were slaves and that your community is filled with nothing but criminals and that immigrants are inferior, all of that will eventually have its detrimental effects on people. That's why these people like, and I know I'm extrapolating a lot from this like small segment here, but based on what you were telling me about his upbringing, his struggles with his mom and all of that, if and based on the way that he's choking up, that's how valuable these mentors are to
Yeah.
kids in the hood. So that's why, again, important to
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, and a lot of the information that I got was from this episode of What It Takes
Yeah.
that I just listened to, and he talks um, about sort of that moment with Hope Martinez, who was a teacher, and basically what happened was at the time, like similar to what you were describing, there was a lot of fights, a lot of things happening in school, and I guess he and his friends used to like do uh, Jesus, I'm messing it now.
Hey, that's not Pitbull.
No, that's John Travolta. That's funny. He looks like
Yeah, I
him.
know. I was like, what's
I
going
was
on
like, wait a
here?
minute.
Are we doing a documentary, a biopic on Pitbull?
This might be another video that he did, which is funny. I mean, when you think about it, if uh, Pitbull is to the point with freaking John Travolta, uh, one of the iconic, I think, American definitions of cool, of sexy, of a man who can dance and
Yeah.
do all these things, is trying to be like him. I think he's reached a pretty high level.
You think Travolta's trying to be like Pitbull just on the appearance, or is there more to that?
Well, I think part of it is trying to stay relevant, right? So I think trying like what a lot of artists do is partner with younger artists to try to stay hip and
Okay,
stay
sorry,
top of
I have
mind.
absolutely no context into this. This Studio Tango is a Pitbull video, and Travolta's in it.
I guess so, and I think have I seen it? I may have seen it.
Okay, I'm not gonna
Um,
play it, but I thought it was some show or some production that John Travolta was putting together that just happened to be named Pitbull. I don't know if it was associated with, but I guess I should have seen this right here that there's lyrics. Okay,
yeah.
so that makes sense. All right, yeah, I don't want to get sidetracked with this, but go ahead and finish what you were saying.
What was I saying? Oh yeah, so they were basically battling each other, rapping and all that stuff. And she saw him, and she sort of gave him the encouragement to say, "Hey, this is something special." And then she also extended an invitation for him to go to the filming of an event with DMX and Dragon at the time, where he sort of got an opportunity to rap and kind of get discovered. So it's even opening those doors that a mentor can do. And I remember one of my dear mentors back in junior high, like she told me about a summer science program in Connecticut, which I was like, what is that?
Hmm.
And I was able to kind of get a somewhat of a college experience in the summer and get a taste for what that was like. But I had to hustle. I was there with another friend, and his brother and his mom took us, and it was a whole different world. But it was kind of like one opportunity that led to many other opportunities. So it's the kind of role that positive role models can play in young kids' lives. But
Yeah,
yeah, so
and
I think if you
yeah,
go ahead.
finish your thought and then I'll respond.
No, I think if you play this, you kind of get a little bit of what he talks about in the podcast, but remember to turn on the volume.
Yeah.
My mother taught me to think out the box. My mother taught me what it is to have vision, to set goals, and to accept that not everything in life is going to go your way, and not everything is perfect. And as a matter of fact, imperfect, if you look at that, and you separate the words, means I'm perfect. Imperfection is beautiful. Failure is beautiful. Losing is beautiful. It all depends on how you look at it. My mother.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, if you want to take that point of view that everything is perfect no matter what, I'm not criticizing him. I'm telling you, I understand how you can arrive at that conclusion. And it sounds like his mom also played a pivotal role in his life, which is good. You need that support from your parents, and you need mentors outside of your home also. But it's very important to have that in the home as well. And the last point that I'll make on this, because I know we do want to talk a little bit about Kamala Harris, is the age in which you get that positive encouragement and those mentors around you, it's crucial because I don't know what's the right age. It's hard to say. It's probably different for each individual. It's somewhere between, don't screw up the kid before they're 5 and 6, so that they don't have any traumatic memories, and then somewhere between 5 and 12, or somewhere in there, that's when you need to have someone, your family or those around you, instill a sense of confidence, of self worth, that you can achieve things. Because I know that detractors of, if someone's listening to these, detractors will say, well, I knew someone that had a mentor, and no matter what that mentor was telling them, they just didn't listen, and they didn't listen to any of the advice, and you could try all you wanted to, but they still chose to go down this wrong path. Well, that's very likely that's just because that's already happening at a point where the individual has internalized a certain mindset, right? So that you get to a point where if somebody tries to intervene, it may already be too late, or it may take a lot more effort. Whereas initially, all that a mentor could have done was just believe in you, give you projects, reward you for your achievements, make you think that there's value in you, that you can accomplish things. Maybe it's as simple as that at some point in your life. But if it's later on, when you've already gone through trauma and internalizing that you're inferior, that you can't achieve things, now the mentor cannot just do those simple things. Now the mentor has to provide therapy and undo years of damage, and that takes time too. That takes months. That could take years of therapy. So it's not black and white. Don't just because I mean, I'm speaking to the audience out there. Just because you know someone that didn't respond to mentorship doesn't mean that doesn't invalidate what we're saying. It's very crucial that happens at a point in the developmental stage of someone where they're receptive to that, and a lot of damage hasn't happened yet.
No, you're right, and I think you mentioned this earlier, but I think the psychological, um, emotional parts of it are so important, and it does take, um, making sure that that individual, that kid, has a healthy sense of self, and sort of the tools, the mentality, and some of the things that, and I think as kids you sort of pick that up just from your parents or
Hmm.
from others in your life. You kind of, I mean, sometimes they're intentional about, like, mijo, this is what this is what you need to do, and they kind of give you those very direct life lessons, and sometimes they're just kind of life lessons that you pick up on your own, just by observing, or your own little mind analyzing things. But to your point, like, that internal mental psychological work is so important, and it could be the difference between, people picking a path or another, or being able to believe in themselves,
Hmm.
enough, and be comfortable with failing, and not sort of allow themselves to spiral into vices and other things that won't let them, um, get ahead.
Yeah, definitely.